Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
I'm Travis Newton.
And this is GenreVision. Every week, Travis and I review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And this week, we're going to witness something wonderful with 2010, the year we make contact. Yes, we're going to be diving into the sequel to Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. But before we do that, we would like to remind everybody that this episode of GenreVision is brought to you by our wonderful Patreon premium subscribers at patreon.com/GenreVision. If you go to patreon.com/GenreVision, you can become a premium subscriber for just $5 a month. You get access to all of our bonus content that we do for all the GenreVision shows. We only keep adding more and more stuff there. I think we're up to like 50 plus hours of bonus content. When we say that the Patreon premium subscribers are bringing you the show, we mean that 100%. So if you'd like to be a part of that, please go to patreon.com/GenreVision. We also would love it if you reviewed the show on iTunes, or I guess it's not iTunes anymore, it's now Apple Podcasts. We actually got a review from Kevy Metal World, who said, 5 stars, GenreVision for life. In-depth, informative, and conversational discussions about the movies you love, will soon love, or wish you could love more. It's like spending time with the two friends you look forward to hanging out with every week. Aw.
Hey.
That's very warm. Thank you, Kevy Metal World.
The warmest review from the chilliest Canadian.
Yes. So if you would like to help the show out that way, just leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. If you do, we promise to feature it here on the show. And last but not least, we do want to remind everybody that we are now taking submissions for our Q&A episode. You can go to GenreVision.com, and there's a post on the main page for our Q&A episode where you can submit questions in the comments. You can email us. The email contact's on GenreVision.com. You can tweet at us at GenreVisionPod. All sorts of ways to get in contact with us, and we'll be recording those. I think that Q&A is going to be going on in February, if I remember correctly.
The Q&A comes out on 2/2/2020. And as of right now, as we sit here and record this podcast, there's nothing. We announced it last week, and there's nothing. So go to the main page at GenreVision.com. Look for the Riddler and leave your comments there. And like Drew said, you can find other methods of contact there as well if you don't want to leave a comment or if you'd rather be anonymous. But please submit questions in time for our February Q&A. It'll be here quicker than you think.
Well, let's move on to our main topic. 2010, the year we make contact, written, produced, directed by Peter Hyams. This is a sequel that I've been dying to revisit because I saw this when I was way too young and only remembered one or two things from it. To be fair, I assumed that the reason this doesn't get talked about a lot is because it's a sequel to 2001: A Space Odyssey, which I don't think it's hyperbolic to say is one of the most influential and impactful films ever made.
Sure. So 2010, the year we make contact, came out in 1984. The novel it's based on came out a couple years prior in 1982. And Hyams had, he had been in sci-fi for a little bit, and he had made a movie called Capricorn 1 that was kind of about a government hoax. And, it definitely echoes a few things that people accuse Stanley Kubrick of with regard to the moon landing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he's an interesting choice to direct a sequel to a Kubrick film, not because he cares to emulate Kubrick's style, or maybe is not even capable of emulating Kubrick's style. It's because he has kind of a style all his own. And he's never been regarded as a particularly, signature filmmaker. I guess you can call him sort of a journeyman filmmaker. He's a bit like Tobe Hooper in that way, in that he'll change his style to suit the material. Although there are things throughout Hyams' filmography that you can look at and say, oh, okay, I kind of recognize that. Later on, when he started making horror movies in the 90s, like The Relic or End of Days, those movies kind of got famous for not having a whole lot of lighting. It's not that the lights weren't there. It's just the film was just especially dim. I don't know if you've seen either of those movies, listener. I know Drew's seen them because you drew.
Well, I wanted to talk about, I guess we'll jump in here. I wanted to talk about Peter Hyams because 2010 as a sequel was not something, from my research, that the studio was itching to make or anything. It wasn't like they were sitting on this and that he just happened to come around at the right time. This was something of a passion project for him. And that's why I particularly wanted to mention that, because it's how you see him credited on screen, is this is written, produced, directed by Peter Hyams. And he was apparently very, very aware of the legacy that he was playing in, and spoke to Kubrick about the sequel and what he wanted to do, and is very faithful. I think used some of the original models and stuff of the Discovery.
I've read that after 2001 finished production that Kubrick ordered all that stuff destroyed, so they had to remake the model of the Discovery based on stills from the original film. I don't know how true that is, but it sounds like something that happens rather frequently when there's a long time between sequels and they have to replicate models and things like that. They just kind of have to wing it based on available data.
Right.
And, 2001 came out in 68. 2010 came out in 84. So it's quite a gap.
It is. And another impetus for doing this episode was that we did Dr. Sleep last month, which was another long gap in between a sequel to a very renowned Kubrick movie. And 2010, I think, is an incredibly fascinating movie to me because it has to try and find a way to fit into the universe that Kubrick created in 2001 in adapting Arthur C. Clarke's novel, but it has to be its own thing. It can't be a Kubrick pastiche. And Hyams does a really good job of walking the thinnest of tightropes in that regard. I think this fits in with 2001 incredibly well, and it's also a very, very different experience.
Sure. Well, I think it knows how to reuse the visual elements of 2001 without trying to emulate the artistic aspirations of the original film. It has different artistic aspirations, whereas 2001 was kind of a chilly and distant film emotionally, and it had some very heavily sort of satirical or almost absurdist elements to it. 2010 is a much more human film that focuses on the emotions of the characters instead of trying to create some sort of ponderous space opera. I don't dislike 2001, but it's certainly nowhere near anywhere near the top sci-fi films for me. And 2001 is a movie with a built-in nap in the middle, I think.
Okay, wow.
I mean, some of the shots and takes in 2001 are so extended to the point, I think, of comedy. In the original 2001, after a team of scientists, one of whom is Haywood Floyd, played by William Sylvester, find a black monolith on the moon, another black monolith is found, a much bigger one, floating out near Jupiter. And so a team of astronauts and scientists is assembled on this ship called the Discovery. The Discovery is managed by this computer named HAL. And then as the Discovery nears their destination, the astronauts and the scientists are totally unaware of what they're going to do. They've been sent on some mission that they haven't been informed about, evidently getting closer to this monolith that's orbiting Jupiter. Hal goes crazy and starts to kill people. There's a section of the film where the protagonist of the film, if you can really even call him that, because the film spends so long before even introducing him, the protagonist of the film, played by Keir Dullea, this Canadian actor who you'll actually hear about next week when we talk about Black Christmas. Dave Bowman is the name of his character. He goes to retrieve the dead body of another one of the scientists, and his trip out to retrieve this dead body is so long and so ponderous that it's like, did you get lost looking in your own reflection, Stan?
Well, now that we've gotten, I think, a nice refresher on 2001, and we can call back to it when we have to. 2010 starts at, I think, a really natural story point. Dr. Haywood Floyd, now played by Roy Scheider.
Looking like a baseball mitt.
I don't know. He's a barber's razor strop.
I mean, it looks like he just got off a beach in Amity. He is looking so tan. He's got jean shorts. He's got some sort of brown jacket on. He's looking Chief Brody as fuck.
He is horse saddle brown. Like, he is so leathery. It turns out that because the mission in 2001, everybody was assumed dead. They don't know what really happened to the Discovery back on Earth. Dr. Floyd, he was the leader of the mission. You know, it was his decision to form it and everything. And he kind of took the fall. 2010 opens with the scene, this great scene of this. I forget where it was. I saw it in the credits, but this satellite array where Floyd is just hanging out. I don't know what he's doing.
It's just chilling. I think this satellite array is called the Very Big Array, if I'm not mistaken.
That sounds about right. This Russian guy comes up to him and tells him, hey, we know you are going to build another Discovery to go back to Jupiter to see what's going on. Well, we have a ship that we're building in Russia, and it's going to be done before you. And we'll get there before you do. But you have the men that know the Discovery systems. You have the man that knows Hal, and we're going to have to try and investigate what happened with Hal. We should team up. And while this is a very simplistic setup as far as the way the scene is, where Roy Scheider's at the top of the staircase and the Russian guy's at the bottom, and they slowly start to meet in the middle as they discuss, I think the performance and the dialogue writing here from Hyams is really good. Like, it hooked me in right from the get-go.
Sure, and it's pretty apparent what the movie is getting at thematically from this very first scene. It's called the Very Large Array, by the way. I misspoke. Oddly enough, curiously close to the big fucking satellite array, which is just next door. So, you know, the Soviet guy who's come over is like, hey, can you meet me halfway up the stairs? I think he asked him. And it's like, oh, this is going to be about the Americans and the Soviets meeting halfway.
Yeah, it's not subtle.
No, it's not subtle at all. And it continues to be very unsubtle throughout the rest of the movie. And, you know, we spent a whole prior episode talking about unsubtle political messaging. And I guess we'll have to talk a little bit about more of that kind of stuff later on in the episode. But, you know, the movie makes its sort of speculative fiction statements early on in that it's like, okay, the year is 2010, the Soviet Union is still around, and the Cold War is still happening, but it is on the verge of escalating into all-out war.
Yeah, as the movie progresses, we get kind of updates from either news beats on TV or other characters relaying information that they heard that the war is outright escalating into full-on conflict.
Evidently, the leader of the Soviet Union in 2010 looks exactly like Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah, it's a cute little cameo on a magazine cover.
Yep. And the American president looks like Arthur C. Clarke.
Right. So they're going to have this mission, and the movie is under 2 hours, but I like that this first act feels like the right kind of buildup of we're getting to be introduced to Haywood Floyd and kind of the person that he is. We're obviously going to have to find out something more about Hal, because Hal was such a huge part of the first movie. We get to meet the doctor that actually pretty much created Hal, Dr. Chandra, played by Bob Balaban.
Awesome facial hair. Oh my gosh.
Who's talking to Sal 9000, who is the female, I guess, version, or like a less developed version of Hal, it seems. I'm not sure, but it's just another artificial intelligence. And he's going to go up there because they have to figure out, we don't know what happened to Hal. Why did he malfunction? So eventually we do get up into space on this Russian spaceship called the Leonov, which I like that name. I'm sure it has much more meaning, but I didn't look into it. I just like it.
I believe Alexei Leonov was a cosmonaut. I could be mistaken.
That sounds exactly right. It's very clear that there's going to be tension on this ship because it's a Russian crew and these Americans are pretty much hitching a ride because they need them. Some of the Russians don't speak any English, so there's a language barrier for some of them. There's a chilliness and a suspicion. But I have to talk about the Leonov as a ship. I love this ship so much.
It's probably one of my favorite movie spaceships, like, ever. At least right now. I think the design of it externally is fucking so cool.
Yeah, it's wonderful. The big rotating section that I absolutely love. The model work and the majority of the special effects and visual work that's done on this movie, I don't know why it's not talked about more.
Yeah, it's kind of at the level of James Cameron's Aliens and Life Force, the unconventional vampire movie that we reviewed last month, which actually has really good spaceship models and really great compositing effects in space.
Yeah, there's a couple moments when they have there's so many elements on screen sometimes in the space backgrounds.
Yeah, and the compositing, when they have multiple elements in compositing, can get a little bit wonky just because the film has to go through multiple optical processes to do that.
Right. You'll see, like, I think they send a probe out at one point. It's like, well, you've got the Discovery in the frame, you've got the Leonov, you've got the probe, and it's like they're trying to do so much and the ambition is incredible, but you can see, like, the matting on the probe when it's moving.
Sure.
You know, that they had to do for the on the composite. But it's not like a huge deal breaker thing to me. I was just much more wowed that, man, they really pulled off this big stuff in a way that is not, it's not special effects bombast. It's really striving for what the movie believes, the movie's idea of authenticity.
Sure. And even though the effects are really great, it still doesn't have the same sort of showy approach that 2001 had. And I'm not actually saying showy in this instance to disparage 2001. I'm saying that 2001 was an effects showcase. It was really designed to show these things. The miniatures in 2001: A Space Odyssey are unbelievable.
Yeah, but Kubrick shoots that movie with a sense of awe for a lot of what you see on screen. Like, he has genuine awe for these effects and what they're trying to communicate. Hyams has awe. That's certainly something we'll talk about as we progress through the movie. But I think he is even more committed to trying to ground these ideas for an audience in 1984.
It's a lot more Star Trek, to be frank. It's way more interested in, like, this kind of Star Trek approach to showing starships in space.
Well, and to continue on that, it's not just the exterior. The interior of the Leonov, like the big bridge area, makes me so happy.
It's the perfect blend of Star Trek and Alien. It's so good looking.
It's like a Willy Wonka spaceship because everything is just these different colored panels. Everything is so rainbow. I love it.
There's a sequence where the captain, the Russian captain of the Leonov, who's played by Helen Mirren.
Yay!
She's like, I think it's either her or one of the other crew members that's piloting the remote probe, and to do so they have to pull these like chrome handles, these sort of chrome cylinders out of the panel, and they're manipulating it, and you can see all the sort of rainbow color of lights reflecting in these chrome cylinders, and it's just like, man, that's so fucking pretty. Thank you, movie. Thank you for giving me this in my eyes.
It's pretty, and it reinforces the fantasy of this universe, because I think when you're making a sequel to 2001, there would be a tendency to try and replicate that clinical nature that 2001 is so infamous for in its science fiction, where it eventually goes and becomes more transcendent, obviously does something completely different, but 2010 maintains that kind of wonder at space and makes it something that still feels genuinely fantastical.
But its approach, nevertheless, is way more utilitarian, and it makes space travel feel much more utilitarian and less whimsical. Like 2001 had such this, I think, sense of humor and whimsy about all of its stuff. Like, you know, the Pan Am flight that Dr. Floyd goes on in the original film, that sequence is kind of tongue-in-cheek in a lot of ways, you know, about consumerism and brands, you know. And then the whole scene where they go on the moon bus, like they're going on their little excursion out to the monolith on the moon. It's like, it's so odd extended, like they're all going on a silly picnic. It's really funny. In 2010, all of that kind of tongue-in-cheek aspect is pared back. There's no sense of whimsy to it. The Leonov is this sort of intimidating presence from the outside. It's way more influenced by what Alien had, and you know, it's very Nostromo. And of course, the Soviet design is going to influence a lot of that utilitarian feel. I love the design of the flight suits. I think it's really, really great looking. But then again, I'm a total Alien fetishist. There is a section of the film that I think that is important to talk about as, as a whole. While they do manage to get to space really quickly and efficiently in the whole of the film, there's this sequence with Dr. Floyd, played by Roy Scheider, and his character's wife, who's a marine biologist, and it establishes their dynamic on Earth, and their kid before Floyd leaves on this mission.
Yes, I will say one of my criticisms about 2010 is that while it is trying to be more about the human emotion of things, I think a lot of the character work it's just kind of borderline functional.
Yeah.
It works, but it's nothing special. And this sequence where we see Floyd and he's got to tell his wife that he's the one that's going to go away and tell his kid that, that he's going to be gone for this much time and they don't know what's going to happen and blah, blah. Like it's a stock scene, but thankfully these people have pet dolphins in their house.
There's a fucking hole in their living room that leads to a dolphin pool.
This was the kind of thing that at first I'm just giggling because this is such a silly futurist type thinking, and it's like, okay, well, she's a marine biologist and maybe there's something for state, but like, yeah, there's a dolphin hole, like not a blowhole, but like, for a pool that they can pop up and feed. We're introduced to Floyd's son feeding these dolphins and they can swim under the house and all this kind of stuff. But as goofy as that is, it does tie into, I think, the larger thematics of both 2001 and 2010 and kind of Clark's foundational interest in this particular science fiction story. These are stories about intelligence and the value of intelligence. And that sounds really snooty and snobbish.
Very Arthur C. Clarke.
But I like that it's a story in a universe that is saying that intelligence is the most incredible, miraculous gift in the universe because it's clearly so exceedingly rare.
Yes.
And what we as humans even can categorize as intelligence, what if there was something even beyond that? Like how miraculous and beautiful would that be? And so having these dolphins show up, it's like, yeah, dolphins are intelligent creatures and we're shown a future where we're living, I guess, in harmony with them by keeping them as pets and under our swank apartments. I don't know, but there's pet dolphins in this movie, and that's what's important.
So I like the idea of intelligence with regards to Hal, because I think, the original film's kind of cynical or satirical bent made Hal a very scary presence in the film.
Yeah, Hal's one of the great on-screen villains.
No question. And Douglas Rain as the voice of Hal is sort of one of the signature voices of cinema from the 60s. I mean, it's just so iconic.
Hal, I mean, this is always my favorite anecdote about Hal, is like Hal and Douglas Rain's performance of HAL 9000 is so influential that when they started doing AI voice command stuff like Siri, the default was female, because they said any kind of male voice that people can identify as even slightly inhuman creeps them out. And so much of that has to do with our cultural recognition of HAL's kind of cold delivery, and that being something that we should be scared of.
I mean, there are even HAL 9000 jokes built into the current version of Siri.
Right.
You can tell her to open the pod bay doors, for instance.
Exactly.
So obviously that performance and, the iconic red eye, like that's just been such a lasting idea. And 2010 knows that they're going to have to handle him delicately, because it's just such, it was possibly the biggest icon to come out of the film. Keir Dullea, and this is certainly not a knock against him, he's kind of meant to be transparent in the film. Like, I guess he's the star of the film in some ways, but the when you watch 2001, you certainly don't feel like that at the end of the day. You feel like he was sort of a character who was along for the ride, and narratively speaking, he kind of was, because he didn't really know what was going on. So 2010 lets us know that Hal has to be dealt with like he's dangerous. And the film builds up a fair amount of, I think, fear around him. He's definitely regarded as dangerous. And the first inkling I think we get of that is really brilliant. It's one of my favorite scenes in the film. Before they launch Bob Balaban's character, Dr. Chandra, is talking to Sal 9000. And he says he's going to have to shut her down before he leaves to go to Jupiter. And she asks him, will I dream? And he says, perhaps you'll dream of Hal, just as I often do. And I thought, ooh, okay, all right, this thing's got something going on. I really started to like the film at that point, really like it.
Let's talk about Bob Balaban and Dr. Chandra, or Chandra, I don't remember how they pronounce it.
Well, for one, I think it's supposed to be a character of Indian descent played by Bob Balaban.
Maybe.
Chandra, I believe, is an Indian name.
I mean, that's all we have to go on, so I can't make that deduction. But this is definitely the most interesting character in terms of like sci-fi nerd perspective. This is the person I want to spend the most time with. And the time that we spend with him is very interesting because this introductory scene where he's talking to Sal, it establishes that he does not treat these AIs as robots, as computers, as non-human beings. He treats them as an intelligence. And later in the movie, he outright states that to the rest of the crew and says that, look, this thing has sentience. It's a not a person as we know it, but it's a being of intelligence, and we should treat it just as we would any other intelligent being. And that is not only wonderfully sympathetic towards artificial intelligence, but it's an interesting character motivation because a lot of the other characters could be like, why don't we just shut Hal down and kill him and, do whatever. And Bob Balaban's the only one saying, no, you have to treat this like it's another human being. Like it. And of course, as an audience and as we're built up in the course of 2010, to be worried about Hal, like what's Hal going to do? What exactly happened? And there is what I think can be considered retconning.
Sure.
Happening in 2010 in regards to Hal, because in this, it's revealed that the reason Hal went haywire and ended up killing Frank, one of the other crew members of the original Discovery mission, and the other scientists that were in hypersleep. In the original 2001, I think it's implied that because they're getting closer to this monolith, which is this source of extraterrestrial intelligence and affects the intelligence of those around them, that it was somehow screwing with Hal and making him more aware of himself, or just, kind of made him go crazy. In 2010, they say that the reason Hal went crazy is that he got a conflicting order from Earth to lie basically to the crew and not reveal a certain aspect of the mission to them. And Hal as a program was never designed to do that, and it made him kind of crazy.
Right. Yeah. It's this order that says that the Discovery was sent out to investigate the monolith, but Hal wasn't supposed to ever reveal that to Bowman or Poole. So this drives Hal nuts. And this order is supposedly signed by Dr. Floyd, Roy Scheider's character, but he has no memory of ever signing the order. Turns out it was something secret done by the president's office. Mm-hmm. So, more political commentary talking about sort of subversive, there's a lot of secret stuff. There's sort of a Cuban Missile Crisis going on throughout the film, except it's something happening in Honduras that's sparking additional conflict between the Soviet Union and the U.S.
Yeah, there's a blockade going on, and we get all this. I think what's more interesting, and again speaks to the optimism in Clark's original idea and what Hyams kind of took from that for this movie, is there are multiple times throughout the movie where someone will say something to the effect of, just because our governments are acting like idiots doesn't mean we have to. We're scientists, damn it. That's kind of the attitude, is like, we need to be better than these systems that are in play, that are greater than us, that are clearly acting wrongheadedly. We're supposed to be scientists. We're supposed to be literally the bastions of intelligence.
Right. Trying to recognize and appreciate each other's intelligence for what it is, and not having to abide by the rules because our governments are acting like asses, I think is what is said in the movie.
Right. So this thematic statement, again, that's like, hey, that's what scientists should be. They should be above all the bullshit and be doing whatever is the most logical and best thing. It's a really Mr. Spock type science fiction idea, but it's optimistic. I like that kind of optimism that I don't think, and maybe we'll talk about this when we get to the end, I don't think it ever comes across as maudlin.
No, maybe a little naive or idealistic, I guess.
Maybe, but that's okay. Like you're supposed to be idealistic in these kinds of stories. That's, so I get that. So the stuff with Hal, it comes around that this order that was finagled by the White House is the reason that made him screwy. It retroactively makes Hal less of a villainous character, but still we're unsure of how he's going to act, because eventually they're going to have to sacrifice the Discovery in order for the Leonov to get back home. We can get to the particulars of that in a little bit.
Yeah.
But the best scene in the movie for me is when Bob Balaban is on the Discovery and he has to talk to Hal to convince him to do this launch and everything. And Hal continues to ask questions. Hal is naturally inquisitive. That's the way he was made.
Well, and he has certain orders, but basically the thing they're trying to get around or avoid is having to lie to Hal, because they think he's going to figure it out. And, they fear that he's going to lose his shit again.
Well, clearly lying to Hal is a bad idea.
Right.
So, it's not vindictive on Hal's part. It's that lying to him confuses him so much that he doesn't know what the right course of action is.
Right. He's not bad. He's just drawn that way.
Right. And this sequence where Bob Balaban has to tell him straight up, like, this is what's going to happen. We're going to have to launch the Discovery. I love when he tells Hal stuff like, you've completed the mission. You've done very well, kind of placating him.
There's a good lad.
I like the idea of intelligences that are possibly greater than ours that are equally that need to be treated somehow like a child. That happens a lot in like Star Trek episodes and stuff.
Right.
I love that idea that a greater intelligence is also in a way a simpler one. So this sequence where he has to tell Hal what's going on and what's going to happen kind of ends up being a really wonderful tense moment, because Hal will keep counting down the launch, but then pop in with a question like, oh, there's this anomaly on the side of Jupiter. Don't you want to stay and study it? I think that would be good for the mission. You're like, fuck no.
Yeah, his natural inquisitiveness is childlike, and it's at the same time creepy. But like all the other things going on in the film at the time range from, a little bit naive or maudlin, like the political stuff, to actually quite creepy, and even borderline absurd. We get a little bit of follow-up as to what happened to Dave Bowman. If you've seen the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey, Bowman joins with the monolith at the end of that film. He goes and has this huge psychedelic experience and sort of sees himself unlinked from time, sees an old version of himself, sees the Star Child, the big baby version of himself. And then we have this instance where this cosmonaut named Max, who oddly enough is played by the same dude that plays Peter Parker's landlord in Spider-Man 2 and 3. Mm-hmm. Elia Baskin, that's the actor's name. But he approaches the monolith, it reacts to him, and he dies in the reaction, supposedly. Then we cut to Earth, and there is this woman, Mary Jo Deschanel, oddly enough, with the mom of Zoe and Emily Deschanel. Mm-hmm. She is watching television, and it announces that the president of the United States is going to wage war against Russia. And then her dead husband, Dave Bowman, played again by Keir Dullea, appears on the television and tells her, like, I'm not sure I'm Dave anymore, but, hey, hope you're doing good.
We were talking before we were recording, and I said that 2010 and Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' Watchmen are kind of weirdly simpatico in a lot of their storytelling choices.
Yeah.
This was one of them where I'm like, yeah, Dave from 2001 has kind of gone through his Dr. Manhattan phase, where he has experienced some kind of intense sci-fi event, and now he's returned as something more than Dave, because he says something to the effect on the TV like, everything that was Dave Bowman is a part of me. Mm-hmm. And so he still is Dave, but he's something more, whatever this is. And he tells his wife, so something's going to happen, something wonderful, which is one of the only things I ever remembered from this movie. He also goes and visits his mom and ghost brushes her hair.
Yeah, and then she dies happy.
That's the one kind of out of place moment in the movie for me.
It's real corny. It's a kind of a creepy idea, but still it's very corny. And I think it speaks to this film's motivations on wanting to be a more human story. It wants to make sure that, unlike the first film, which comes off very, very chilly at times, that this was about people who are not only thinking, but also feeling. It's not going through the motions. It's people having to deal with moral and emotional quandary and
connection. One of my favorite moments of the movie is on the Leonov, they're going to do this thing called aero braking, which is this big technical process of like launching these big chutes and using Jupiter's gravity to do it. The specifics of it aren't important. What is important is this has never been done before, this particular technique. It's extremely dangerous, and it's going to be very scary for everybody aboard the Leonov. So Dr. Floyd, Roy Scheider, is laying in his little, cabin area, his bunk, and strapped in, ready for this aero braking. They're counting it down, and one of the Russian crew members, this woman, just knocks on his bunk door and just wants to crawl in with him. And I love that he says to her, "You speak any English?" She goes, "No English." And they're just huddled together because they're just both really scared at that moment.
They just need a cuddle. They need a cuddle. This ship could very well shake apart and blow up. It's a pretty harrowing effect sequence. I actually really like the whole... the ship becomes this giant fireball streaking through the atmosphere of Jupiter. It's pretty cool looking.
It is cool, but I like that it's that simple human moment of I just need somebody to be next to because I'm fucking scared.
Right, and I think it's, this again speaks to the emotional and political cores of the story, where it's like we can recognize the humanity in one another across these borders, whether it be, American and Soviet or even interspecies, as hinted at with the dolphin. It's like these borders can fall, and so we can all recognize each other as intelligent beings who occasionally need to cuddle because we're really fucking scared. So there's that, and then the whole sequence where they have to then dock with the Discovery is another one of these sort of dynamite effect sequences, like the aero braking thing, where the Discovery is spinning in orbit. And you watch this movie and you suddenly realize where a whole bunch of ideas came from for Interstellar, Chris Nolan's movie. It's like, oh, there's a whole bunch of stuff that they did in Interstellar that's repeated in that movie from this.
Absolutely.
So that sequence where John Lithgow and I think it's Elia Baskin's character sort of get linked up and have to establish a bridge basically between the Discovery and the Leonov.
Well, this is another, these moments keep happening. Like we said, it's not subtle of you have to have an American character and a Russian character together somehow, and they have to help each other. And Max, the Russian, is tugging along John Lithgow, who, by the way, John Lithgow's in this movie. This cast is stacked.
He doesn't show up until probably halfway through the film.
Yeah, he's I think he's like the engineer who worked on Discovery's specs, so he knows the ship the best.
Yeah.
Dr. Kurnow is his character. And when him and Max have to go across and link up onto the Discovery, and Kurnow is just freaking out, and Max is being really calm and like, nurturing to him and just trying to make him feel okay. I love that Max says something to the effect of, "Don't worry, I responded the exact same way the first time I did this." And Kurnow's like, "Oh yeah? How many times have you done this before?" And Max goes, "Never." It's really funny and endearing.
No, it's genuinely a little bit sad when Max dies. I
I was super bummed.
Elia Baskin is a wonderful character actor. If you've seen his performance in Spider-Man 2 and 3, like, oh, this guy's really funny, and I just like having him around in pretty much any movies he's in.
Max is heartwarming.
Oh yeah, it's great.
I love it because this sequence where they're having to go back and get on the Discovery and try and get the power back on and all this kind of stuff.
Actually, when they actually get into the Discovery for the first time, it's real creepy.
Yeah, and Max is going to take off his visor to check for the oxygen. And he starts freaking out. There's a weird smell, and he's like, what if Bowman got back on the ship and he died? And then Kurnow has to kind of calm him down. And he keeps asking Max what certain words are in Russian.
Mm-hmm.
And that, again, it's wonderful organic bonding between these characters.
Yeah, that whole sequence works really, really well from when they exit that airlock until they get back aboard the Leonov. It's really good.
But we do have to talk more about Dave Bowman as he continues to pop up. He appears to Dr. Floyd, and this is when we get Changing Dave, in which he appears in different stages of existence, be it. And it's just simple, there's no big grandiose effects other than cut to a reaction shot of Dr. Floyd, cut back, it's a different Dave.
Yep. Every time they cut back to Bowman, it's either really, really old Bowman or slightly old Bowman or, regular aged Keir Dullea Bowman or the fucking Star Child. Or
I love that. I love when they leave the Star Child for last and the Star Child just turns. I swear it's almost like he winks right at the camera.
Oh yeah.
It's so wonderful. I wanted to applaud.
And he's wearing the classic spacesuit, which, by the way, doesn't look like anything else design-wise in the film. So to see him standing there is like inherently sort of absurd, in his old costumes. It's like, this is so out of place.
It's surreal.
Yeah, I think it enhances that surreal feeling that he's just sort of unbound from time and space, and he's kind of transcended normal existence now.
And he's there to warn them that you need to get out of here in 2 days because something's going to happen. There's this continually hinted at, something's going to happen, something wonderful. And it turns out that a giant black spot appears on Jupiter, and it's, I want to say, like hundreds of thousands or millions of monoliths that are appearing, and they are sucking away the color from the actual planet, and that's why they have to escape. So it's like, what is going on?
By the way, Jupiter, all the shots of Jupiter in the exterior are CGI, 3D rendered CGI in a film produced in 1983 and released in 1984.
Looks good.
It does look good for what it is. It's for that early CGI. It holds up.
I think it still looks pretty damn good.
When Jupiter's collapsing, you can definitely start to tell, like, oh, okay, this is a 3D rendering, and then they show some 3D renderings of like the monoliths flying around in the center of Jupiter in sort of a geometric pattern as Jupiter collapses in on itself.
But they do a smart thing, and because that, I was like, that's got to be CG. Like, that's got to be really early computer graphics effects. They make sure to only show it on like a small CRT monitor. So it's like, okay, there's enough levels of degradation distance from this that I'm not focusing on. Like, if it was just whatever the clear effect shot of that CG was, then it would be like, oh yeah, that's some reboot looking shit. But it works. It totally, completely, the effect. There was never a moment in this movie that I can think of where the effect was so blatant to me that it took me out of the movie.
Yeah. Speaking of effects, like that particular Jupiter effect, like most often when we see it, it's when Haywood Floyd is doing voiceover stuff, basically like writing in his diary or sending transmissions back to Earth. And it's so fucking Star Trek. These are actually my least favorite sections of the film, where it's like his voice, there's a little bit of reverb on it. He's like, today I woke up and this happened today, and gosh, I missed my son and this, and I was like, and they play like the same cue from the score every single time. It's just so Star Trek.
Well, like you said, it's Captain's log. We got to update the audience on what's going on. That there was an act break, or this is basically going to act as our scene transition. Is, well, we'd rather just tell the audience directly what's going to happen next, so we don't have to spend a whole bunch of time setting it up. There's more organic ways to do that. Again, functional. It's functional. It works. It's not great, but it's fine. It keeps the movie going. I'll say that for a movie that's under 2 hours that I think a lot of people might see as, quote, boring because, quote, nothing happens, that kind of argument. I think the movie moves really, really well.
It's because, they could have had, like you're saying, they could have had conversations where the crew is sitting around and discussing all of this stuff, but they kept the conversations between, say, for instance, Roy Scheider and Helen Mirren's character. She's the hard-ass Soviet captain. They could have had more conversations between the two of them, but instead what they focused on is that when the two share screen time, those scenes fundamentally have to be about American-Soviet relations.
Well, and I think they get into the humanity after Max dies.
Yeah.
They were gonna send a probe, and Max is gonna do it, and Floyd is the one to say, "Don't send an unmanned probe. Like, we don't know what's gonna happen." Of course, Helen Mirren's character says, "No, we're gonna send Max and the manned probe," and he ends up dying. So we get a nice, it's little, but it's effective. It does what it needs to do. A little scene between the two of them drinking, because he's stowed away some
bourbon,
some whiskey, some Kentucky bourbon, and they're drinking together and talking about Max and what happened and what they're gonna do, and it works. I'm there's plenty of people on the Russian crew that we never really get to spend any legitimate time with. They're just kind of there. As I said earlier, I think some of the character stuff isn't the greatest. It's borderline functional, like I said, but it works. But the bigger stuff at play, I think, is really singing, especially when we get towards the end, where we realize what is going on when they're trying to make their final escape. All of this, I think, is shot extremely well, as far as like we've said, the exteriors and all the model work and stuff, and the realization of what is going on. What happened? What is the something wonderful? It was the only other thing I remembered about this movie, is that Jupiter has been transformed by all these monoliths into a brand new star.
Yep.
It's a new sun.
It creates a brand new solar system in an existing solar system, where the moons around Jupiter are now the new planets, sort of little mini planetoids in this tiny little solar system. It's a very cool idea. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that before.
It's crazy. I mean, for everybody, who loves those twin sun shots from Star Wars, it's like, well, this is doing something very, very different and interesting with that concept. It's not just a cool visual. It's saying that whatever the intelligence of the monoliths, or whoever sent them, or whatever they are, because I like that this movie doesn't give us, it doesn't feel indebted to give us a whole bunch more answers from as a sequel. I think, especially with a sequel as nebulous and purposefully ambiguous as 2001, 2010 could have gone full hog and been like, we're going to explain everything.
Right. Really, the only thing it answers from 2001, 2001 leaves you with this ambiguity of is what happened to Dave something that is ambivalent, something that is sort of, agnostic? Does it have any sort of malevolent intention or benevolent intention? You don't know when that movie ends. But in this one, you definitely don't get the sense that what is happening with the monoliths is something evil, or, it's not like, say, the engineers in Prometheus, which are, this godlike force of creation and destruction that are designed clearly to be sort of evil, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Well, with Prometheus, it's that they're dick gods. And the monolith, because the other thing is, we have this giant monolith that's orbiting around Jupiter. It disappears. It's like, is that the great grandpappy intelligence? What are the monoliths, just tools? Those answers aren't really given, but it's clear that there is some other intelligence out there, because when it turns Jupiter into a star and creates a new solar system, a message is sent by Hal. Dave's spirit, or whatever was Dave, shows up back on the Discovery before it's destroyed and says to Hal, you've completed the mission. Even though this is just two voices on the track and just empty rooms, I got kind of emotional when this scene happened.
Yeah, it felt significant and rewarding to me. It was like the closing of that loop. I thought was good. Yeah,
and Dave again saying, "You've completed the mission, Hal. You've done very well." And Hal saying, "It's good to be working with you again, Dave." I was like, "Oh wow!" I'm just saying it now. I'm like, I'm feeling the feels, yo.
I like it. Yeah.
And so he tells Hal to send this message to Earth. And the message, which is coming from whatever the intelligence is inside the monolith, is saying that all these worlds that have been created from this are yours, except Europa. Don't go to Europa. Don't send anything there. Don't just leave Europa alone. But we've created a brand new solar system for you that can sustain life. Use these worlds together and use them in peace.
Yep. And then the last thing we see is a shot of what is happening on Europa. It is a primordial swamp where a monolith now stands.
Wonderful image. I love that showing that, and just the way it's shot with the monolith kind of in the distance, somewhat in the background, and then just the edge of the new sun illuminating it, and then cut to black. I was like, it's great.
Very compelling.
Yeah, and so yes, we come to the end of the message, which is, hey, this event has stopped the impending war on Earth. It has hopefully united humanity by saying, look, whatever you're fighting for, there are now more resources out there. There's more ability to sustain life. Take advantage of it. Except Europa. Don't go on Europa, or we'll fuck you up. And I like that. I like that there is still this warning from this intelligence saying, like, hey, we're helping you out. Just don't fuck with us.
Yeah.
And so it's still this kind of like, they're mostly benevolent, but they're not above teaching us a lesson when they need to.
Coming back to sort of overall summations, the most troublesome thing in the movie overall, structurally, thematically, is the sort of broad, I don't know, you use the word maudlin. It's almost maudlin, sort of broad, naive political statement. And, last week we got in, a little bit of hot water for talking about how Knives Out made its political statements. And in this film, I still feel the same is true, and that the political statement is, by today's standards, kind of quaint, but not really, I think, by any fault of the film. It's like, oh, in 2001, they thought the Soviet Union and the U.S. would still be sort of, in contention, in this sort of Cold War situation. Obviously, U.S. relations, but, U.S.-Russia relations are much different today than they are depicted in 2010. Couldn't have predicted this, Arthur.
Well, I'll say this is that, yes, 2010 is inescapably topical and dated.
Sure.
for that kind of messaging.
Yeah.
I don't think those elements are ever cloyingly cute.
No.
I think it's taking itself extremely seriously. Not so much that it's like po-faced, but I definitely think that there is an optimism, and if you want to call it a naivete, I'm willing to go there too. But you mentioned Star Trek, and it's like that's what I've always loved about Star Trek is supposed to be the absolute hope of science fiction.
Yes.
Like the best that we could come up with. And 2010 feels a lot like that. It feels like a really good Star Trek movie.
Yeah, I agree. It has that kind of vibe with it, but I think our tone, as a society, kind of changed when we talked about the Soviet Union after Chernobyl. The disaster at Chernobyl didn't happen until almost 2 years after 2010 was released in theaters. And it was one of the things that, it's considered one of the things that contributed to the downfall of the Soviet Union. I think the way that we think about the Soviet Union today, post the Chernobyl incident, and, of course, post many, many things that have happened in global politics, particularly with Russia's sins, it's like, okay, now with hindsight being what it is, the film was a little hokey and corny. But I think, for having to live up to this insane legacy of 2001, which is a classic and regarded by many as an absolute masterpiece, and I understand why, I think 2010 does a more than admirable job of being an excellent science fiction film.
I think it's a really, really good movie. I think I might be willing to call it a great sequel.
I'd agree with that.
It's a movie I would happily watch again. Like I said, our criticisms stand, but I think the things that I love about it and the things that are so effective about it still work all these years later. And I think, much like Dr. Sleep had to do, as a follow-up to a film that has kind of transcended regular pop culture appreciation into something else, I think that 2010 is not only the best sequel we probably could have gotten, it's probably one of the best sequels to a major film that we've ever gotten. I really think as a piece of sequel writing and execution as a production, I am shocked that it is not nearly as heralded as I think it should be.
Well, and I think it's more influential than anybody has ever given it credit for. You know, everybody talked about 2001 when Interstellar came out. Really, they should have been talking about 2010.
Well, and like you even said, I had the exact same thought when we saw the Leonov model for the first time. Like, that immediately made me think of the Sulaco from Aliens.
Well, and, you know, I'm admittedly a sucker for a certain kind of science fiction movie. You know, when there's a group of people who's sent out after one failed mission and their job is to find out what happened to the failed mission, I'm immediately kind of hooked. For whatever reason, I just love that story. And 2010 is one of those stories, just like Sunshine, just like Aliens, you know.
Event
Horizon, Annihilation, you know, just that particular story structure, for whatever reason, tends to stick around in ponderous sci-fi movies. And I don't really use ponderous as an insult. These are thinky movies. You know, they want you to think, and they actively show the characters engaged in intellectual exercise. There you have it. It's I don't know if I would call it an essential movie for just about everybody, but if you enjoy 2001, 2010 is definitely something to stick in the old Blu-ray player. It's pretty damn good, actually.
I think if you like 2001 at all, or if you're somebody who considers it one of your favorite films or one of the best films ever, I think you need to see 2010.
Sure.
I think 2010 is a necessary sequel, especially when we talk about how sequels are made and what their kind of intentions are and what they have to do to stand on their own 2 feet while also delivering what people liked about the first one. Like, sequels are hard, like really, really hard to do.
They got to be different and new, but also the same, and deliver a kind of, you know, comparable experience, but also surprise people. And just be aware that 2010 is such a much more human movie, and its beating heart is much more apparent.
Agreed. And sometimes that doesn't quite work, but I think the big swings it takes are all winners. I really think its biggest attempts are the ones that succeed the most. It's the smaller stuff that kind of doesn't hold up.
Mm-hmm. For instance, we haven't talked too much about Roy Scheider. He's in the film and he's good. He's Roy Scheider, of course. But
let's end on that, I guess. You know, Roy Scheider, I think all the cast is really good and they're doing really good stuff, but it's just not that kind of movie.
Yeah.
Like, it's trying to be, and that's where I think those little interpersonal elements, they don't not work, like, but they never take off in the way I think the movie wants them to, as opposed to the bigger science fiction stuff that's going on that I think all of that sings.
Yeah, and it's like Roy Scheider's character isn't the man of action, I guess you could say, in the film. Like, it's a whole bunch of other characters that are doing the sort of, you know, go and do sort of stuff. He tends to sort of stay behind and trying to figure out intellectually what's the next step. So, but he's still a great anchor for the film. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a great anchor. I think all the cast, supporting cast, everybody's really good. I think this is a really good movie. And it, like, I'll say it again, it's really disheartening not to see it crop up more in discussion. And I don't know if that's just because of the Shadow 2001 casts, or because I think this movie is fairly well regarded critically.
It's kind of mixed critical reception, but I think it deserves reappraisal. I mean, you know, obviously this is very, very punny, but 2001 is such a monolith of a film that it can't help but cast an enormous shadow.
Sure. And I only hope, because we love talking about sequels as a culture, and we always bring up this sequel's better than the original. And I'm not saying that about 2010, but when we talk about great sequels, this needs to be way up there on the list.
For sure, yeah.
You can, like we had, you can have your criticisms about it as a singular experience as a movie, but as a follow-up to 2001, I think this is a home run.
And who's the perfect catcher's mitt? But Roy Scheider.
Well, let's go to the shelf where we pick a movie that might act as a good pairing or substitute for our main topic. And as always, we want you, loyal listeners, to go to GenreVision.com and comment on the post for this episode with your own shelf picks. Travis and I are going to try something. We have not told each other what our shelf picks are, but we believe that we both picked the same movie.
Yep. So we're going to do sort of a 3-2-1 draw. And, after one, we're going to say what it is that we chose. All right?
All right. Here we go. So 3, 2, 1.
Outland. There it is. I fucking knew it.
Yeah. I'm sorry. That got me. I was like literally 5 minutes ago thinking we were coming up to that. I was like, I bet we both pick Outland. Maybe I should change it to Sphere. No. I'm not gonna do that to him. We definitely picked Outland. So.
Outland is basically a loose remake of High Noon set in space. It's directed and written by Peter Hyams. It stars Sean Connery.
I contend that it takes place in the Alien universe.
It's so alien adjacent. It's the ultimate sort of blue collar, sci-fi setting. It's like a mining colony.
And they refer to the company.
They do.
Which is vague enough. I know that, later the company became Weyland-Yutani, but I'm going just off the first Alien where it's just the company. And that's certainly just a blue collar kind of thing to call the man. But the aesthetic of it all, everything, it feels just like another story in this universe.
Yeah.
That's completely different. It's not trying to be an Alien movie. It is this weird Western in space where a bunch of miners are getting hopped up on a drug and kind of having very, very bad reactions to it. And Sean Connery is pretty much the new sheriff in town who has to figure out what's going on, what's this drug that's going around, who's okaying it, how is it getting, into the colony. Peter Boyle's in this as the villain. Yeah.
This has one of the weirdest VR golf scenes in cinema history. It's pretty cool, though. This is, I think, an essential movie if you like blue collar speculative fiction. It's pretty cool. It's certainly no. I was about to say it's certainly no classic, but I'd describe it as kind of a cult classic.
I would absolutely describe it as a cult classic. When you see Sean Connery walking the halls of a space station with a shotgun, like there's just something so joyous to me about that image. They knew it. That's when like so much of the VHS art and everything is.
Yeah.
But it's a really fun movie. It's so well put together. And if you like Alien at all, Outland needs to be the next thing you watch. Like it really fits so perfectly. They would make a phenomenal double feature.
Agreed. All right. And what did our listeners pick for their shelf picks for last week's episode, which was about Knives Out?
Both Pale Fire and Waldrumpus pick the same movie, Murder by Death. Waldrumpus says a whodunit with a great cast that pokes fun at all the various detective stereotypes and movie cliches. I've never seen Murder by Death. I've always loved the title. It's just immediately funny, and I know of it, but I've never seen it, so I might have to rectify that.
I haven't seen it either.
Mr. Milksteak said that their shelf pick was Ready or Not, a dysfunctional family in a large maze-like mansion, both involving games, murder, deceit, and plenty of dark humor. Yes. I think I said on the episode that I would have picked Ready or Not for my shelf pick had I not just recently talked about it, but definitely one of the movies of 2019 people need to see, and we might talk about it a little bit later. And then loyal listener DT Grizzler had what might be my favorite shelf pick because it's just so out of left field. They said that their shelf pick is going to, let me say it specifically. I considered making Death Trap my shelf pick, which I also considered, but I don't know that I'll get a better chance to suggest an episode of Columbo. So I'll go with Double Shock from season 2. Like Knives Out, it involves suspects who are family members of the victim, an inheritance, and a will. More importantly, it has Peter Falk facing off with Martin Landau playing twins, which immediately my ears perked up at that.
You get a double Landau.
Double Landau. So an episode of Columbo, a first for a shelf pick on GenreVision. So thank you, DT Grizzler, and thank you to everybody for their shelf picks. Let's do some currently consuming.
Num, 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 num.
Travis, what's been on your plate as if I don't know already?
Well, I actually have two things to talk about. One of them is a complete surprise.
Okay.
there is a new release from a musician and an artist. He's not only a visual artist and an animator, but also a fantastic musician and composer. His name is Louis Zong, Zong, and he released kind of like a little EP, and it's called Apples. And there are 5 tracks on it. It's Golden Delicious, Ambrosia, Jazz, Granny Smith, and Macintosh, all different kinds of apples. Each song is about 2 minutes long. The songs are kind of folky and funky, very well composed. Some of them sound a little bit like video game music. He has composed music for video games, but it's not chiptune-y. It's just really good. It's cute. It's on Spotify. You could go buy the album from him at his Bandcamp page, which I will link to, or you could listen to the entire thing on his YouTube channel. Anyway, Apples by Louis Zong really made my day today when I was sitting in the fucking car dealership waiting on a 3-hour oil change.
Oh, geez.
Anyway, the next thing I had on my plate was Ready or Not. Recommended as a shelf pick. I missed this at the theaters earlier this year, and boy am I sorry I did, because it's quite good, isn't it?
It's one of the most fun experiences I've had in the theater this year, and I think we talked about it. Let's just keep coming back to this. Last week where I was like, Ready or Not is kind of my preferred version of what Knives Out was somewhat trying to do as far as its commentary. But Ready or Not is also just, it's a really impressive movie, like in every arena, in performance, in production. This was made by the collective Radio Silence. They share that as their director credit. And this was made on $6 million. It looks like it could have been 40 or 50.
It's such a handsome looking picture. And it's a great combination of, excellent locations, just mixed with excellent lighting and, effective costuming. It really does look like, I don't know if I would say 40 million, but it certainly looks more along the lines of a mid-budget film than the very small budget it had. This is a Searchlight picture, a Fox Searchlight picture, one of the few that kind of got put on the shelf when Fox was about to be purchased by Disney and their release schedule was kind of, So this was released, I think, in August or September with minimal marketing. I didn't hear anything about the film until a month before it hit theaters, and I was like, "Oh, surprise, surprise! A new Searchlight horror film." Again, so sorry I missed this in the theaters. It's really wicked fun. It's an excellent horror comedy in that it's not so much scary. It kind of takes up a little bit of influence from movies like You're Next, but I think it's such a much more polished version of that kind of story or that sort of tone. And it's really much funnier than anything I've seen in a horror comedy. I don't know, certainly the rest of this year. Although, I don't know, how much horror comedy have I seen this year? I don't know. Whatever it is, it's definitely eclipsed by Ready or Not. And Samara Weaving is one of the best things about the movie, if not the best thing. She's such a good lead.
Oh yeah, she and the phases she has to go through the movie are just she champions her way through all of them.
Well, she gets some one-liners in that third act that are like, God damn, applause worthy.
Oh, it's a funny movie, and I think the twists and turns are great. I think everybody in the cast is doing a phenomenal job. Andie MacDowell, right?
Yeah, I was living for that.
How can you not?
When she first shows up and she's like smoking very arch, but then it appears that she's like the most human person, in this family that Samara Weaving's character is about to marry into. It's like, yeah, I'm here for this. Anyway,
I love the lore building. Like it's small, it's almost Twilight Zone-y.
Sure.
Yeah, I can't recommend this movie enough. And trust me, when we get to our top 15 of the year, you'll probably be hearing about it again.
What's been on your plate?
Well, talking about top 15, I have a contender that I finally caught up with. I saw Hustlers. This is written and directed by Lorraine Scafaria.
Lorraine Scafaria, yep. She did that Steve Carell Meteor movie.
Yeah, Seeking a Friend for the End of the World.
That's right. And then she did a movie called The Meddler, I think it was, with...
Susan Sarandon.
Susan Sarandon, which, both of those movies were good. The Meddler was pretty damn good, actually, I thought.
And this is based on a true story, based on the magazine article about it by Jessica Pressler, about this group of strippers who found a way to basically rob a bunch of their clients by drugging them and getting their cards and racking up all this debt, and then saying like, hey, nobody's going to go to the police after this because we're just telling them that you got really messed up and you had a good time and you spent all this money. Who's going to know any wiser? And are you really going to want the people in your life to know that you did this at a strip club? And this was said, it's the story starts, I want to say about 2006, 2005, maybe. And our introductory character, kind of our perspective character throughout the movie, is played by Constance Wu, and she's new to the club and isn't really making a whole lot of money until she ends up partnering with Jennifer Lopez's character Ramona, who is just oh my God, Travis, I told you about it, but I'm going to say it again. Her introductory scene in which she comes in and dances to Fiona Apple's Criminal is one of the absolute movie moments of 2019.
I believe it. I haven't seen it yet, but I eagerly await it.
It's astonishing. It immediately blew me away because as far as I know, everything you see on the screen in that sequence is 100% Jennifer Lopez doing these incredibly athletic choreography and everything. It's astounding. And just the emotion of the moment and selling this character, it works. The fact that we got Hustlers and The Irishman in the same year, I feel it's kind of beautiful. Like, Hustlers is absolutely the kind of movie Scorsese would make, but he couldn't make it because it's not from characters or a perspective that I think he would be able to really do justice with. This feels like an evolution or a spin-off of the kind of stuff that he's interested in, while still having its own unique voice and style. It's a very funny movie. This is absolutely, I think, on that level in terms of crime cinema. I really think it's that good that I would bump it up next to something of Scorsese's. I can't recommend it enough. It's absolutely one of the films of 2019 you should see. My big criticism with it is that nothing's really going to surprise you. When I say that it's that kind of crime movie, you can kind of see the beats coming. And that's unfortunate, but I think it's also one of the reasons these movies continue to get made, is there is a comfortable familiarity, especially when they're relaying true life events, is we have to know that, yeah, people got arrested and everything went down. The trajectory is exactly what you expect, but it's not really about that. It's about these characters, their performances, how warm and inviting they are. Where the movie ends is very, very sentimental. And I don't say that in a dismissive way. Like, I felt very close to these characters when the movie was over. I highly recommend it. I definitely think if you're trying to check off a couple movies before the end of the year, don't miss out on Hustlers.
Is it everything we got?
Well, to close things out, we have to do our
Comment of the week.
Okay. So we did Knives Out. And we talked about our feelings about the movie, and we won't say anything that's spoilery here. But if you go to GenreVision.com and look at the comments, loyal listener Hob, who's been with us a very long time and has always been a joy to see in the comments section, took issue with the ways that we were framing and discussing our feelings about the political slant. He had genuine criticisms against our feelings about the movie, and that's great. Like, as we always say when this, and why we kind of highlight these comments when they come up, is we continue to say we don't want the comments to just be echoing what we say. Like, if you agree with us and you really feel that way, please comment and say that. And, we love to hear from you. But if you disagree with us, go for it. Like, say how you feel. And as long as you're doing it in a civil way, great. We made GenreVision.com for a reason, not just to, promote ourselves, but also we wanted to have a place where we felt it was okay to talk about these things and have discussions where people aren't devolving into flame wars and name calling and all this kind of stuff. And as that gets progressively harder and harder to find those spaces on the internet in 2019 and soon, 2020 as we enter the next decade, we want to foster that.
Yeah, it was, Hobb, much to his credit, laid out his arguments in an extremely coherent way. And it's really nice knowing that our listeners are there to hold us to certain standards, certainly. And if we do something that's maybe not cool, hey, please let us know. And Hobb definitely, voiced his concerns, and we are ever appreciative of that.
Well, and I say this because we have a YouTube page. If you go to youtube.com/GenreVision, we get emails when we get comments on our YouTube stuff. Trust me, that always reminds me how much I value these GenreVision commenters.
Oh yeah,
because
YouTubers are YouTube comments that they'll call us soy boys, they'll call us betas.
We get also horrible punctuations and spelling. That is like, I am so thankful for the grammar and spelling and punctuation of our comments in GenreVision. It's always much more coherent than anything we get on YouTube.
God, yes.
I really value that. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm not saying that it's you. Obviously, you're cool.
Sure, of course.
But no, I genuinely want to thank Hobb. Like it's a discussion, and I value that. I love talking about these things and talking about them in a place where we can all disagree and debate, but at the end, it's okay because it's just movies. We know that we're just talking about movies, and we know that we're all coming here for the same reason. We love this stuff, and we want to share it with each other. So, thanks to Hobb, and thanks to everybody that comments, and thank you for listening. It really does mean the world to us. We'll be back next week with a triple feature. We haven't done one of these, I think, since the Spider-Man trilogy.
That is correct.
We're going to be doing a Black Christmas triple feature. The original film, the remake from, I think it's 2006, and the newest version that's coming out from Blumhouse. So we will have 3 movies to try and get through next week. We'll see how long that takes us, but we hope you'll be there. And as always, thank you so much for listening. I'm Drew Deitch.
I'm Travis Newton.
And we'll see you next week.
Right here on GenreVision.